Wow, I did not expect to take this long, but I had to do quite a bit of work, both with this project and just other stuff in life. And yeah, so I don't know if I'll include it all in one video or separate, but I read the Salistamba Sutra, and it's like it's weird how unexpected and yet how so many things can fit into this one little thing, such as Rice Seedling Sutra. And I mean, I don't know, it's just weird, but so many other things. Like, I've slowly been going through the different forms of Buddhism, studying them and like their history, and it's really like interesting at what, like, there's a lot at first, but when you really slowly pick through it, so that goes without saying, I guess, but yeah, just really thinking about this Pure Land and the sort of mandalas that I've accumulated, and just like looking at them, considering the different overlays, I guess, or outlooks, if you want to call it that. Because I don't know, it's just very weird. This whole new like perspective that has opened up for me just recently from reading really the Salistamba Sutra and all these other things I've slowly been reading on my own time and whatnot. But the Sword of Song as well, it's, in a weird way, it's like, even though it's Crowley, like an earlier writing of Crowley's, it's very telling for like the whole, I don't know, it's just very deep, which it's hard, that's I don't know, it sucks because it's hard to put into words all these different thoughts I've had, because it's been so long and I've had to do so much. But really, I see this whole process of the, like, whatever you would want to call it, the path of the Bodhisattva, the actuation process, the positive and negative quality or aspect of the net of jewels, or Indra's net. I don't know, it's just weird how much the Rice Seedling Sutra really does go back to the heart of things, I guess. And the seed can be 93 or 333, whether it's Samak or Shin. And that, again, this 333 being so many Buddhist things, they've accumulated, and rattling them off isn't the same as just like seeing how they come up, how they overlay, how they interlay. And it's not just that one number. Again, it's the whole Kabbalah of 9 chambers, how Huayan Buddhism, which would be, yeah, Buddhism with a Shin, 444. Again, it's just that interconnected mandala in my mind, because there's so many things that equal that too. And people say, oh, well, you can make anything equal anything, but it's really not the case when you're just using the same Hebrew values for the letters based on like basic phonetics. The grammatical perfection is crazy, with especially how much data is compacted in there. And it seems like that's how these sort of, in the directions and in the seeds unfolding, which is really just simultaneously all sorts of, it's a simultaneous thing in a sense, even though there are timelines, I guess you could say, time spirals. And I don't know, it's just, I actually found, again, I always talked about a new book or something, but this I had to get because it was like really cheap, and I was like, wow, no one wants this. Like, I'm surprised it hadn't been bought. but it was at the store, and it's The Mission of Art by Alex Grey. And while it doesn't have too much of an emphasis on, obviously, like, his artwork, even though some of it's in here, it's just in black and white, and there's, like, other like drawings and things. It really gives, like, the background to so many things, and, like, it's funny just because, like, I've already read about so much of what it talks about. I know about it, so in a way it's like a refreshment, or a summary, but yet he talks about, like, the Avatamsaka Sutra, Huayan Buddhism, the Francis Cook book, actually, about it. And so, like, I don't know, it's just weird how overlapping it all is. And so really, what was the whole point of, there's so many different thoughts I had about this seed concept, and also the fact, like, different things set in over a few days to weeks. And, like, for this post I had Liber 7, and then I didn't even realize it, but 67 plus 7 is 74. But yeah, this whole Lamed thing, Lamed and 74 being 2/3 of 111. And I don't know, there's just a lot to that 74, which obviously, again, Crowley wrote Liber 74, which is itself a very short, concise text about sort of the path. And I don't know, the square and the circle comes to mind just because it's Daleth and Aeon, and the sort of Jupiterian influence. But yeah, there's just so many things I kind of want to express about just what this all, like, opened onto, and what caused me to see from a new perspective what has been, I don't know, some process, I guess. And this whole thing about Sophia, and then also the idea, like, Mary and Guan Yin have, like, really come up for me lately. And I had realized, because there's different ways of considering the four worlds, or even the tetragrammaton, in a sense, which Kenneth Grant even talks about, like, as in an Egyptian sort of form, with Maat or Ma'at being the daughter. So Isis, Osiris, Horus, and Ma'at. And in a sense, like, Sophia comes to mind, because this whole Trinity and this fourth, Carl Jung talks about the fourth aspect of God essentially even being, like, related to the dark, like, the whole question of, evil and the Antichrist, and, like, I think he even associates Merlin, at least in the Grail legend, but or maybe that's Emma Young, but either way, like, the Sophia, the symbolism of Sophia is very, like, so I started painting a Sophia over there, just somewhat traditional, but also somewhat, like, my own. But I don't know, there's just so much to this idea to me, and I can't really talk about it. I can only just, like, hope to convey it, I guess, and, like, I don't know. In a sense, that's the whole thing that I keep seeing also, is it's like there's an inner light, or it takes an inner light, and that light is not even light, like, actually I've got this other book, The Rainbow by Carl Boyer, and while it's very heavy on the actual history and the different views and, like, understandings and their developments of the rainbow, in a sense, the whole thing being a bridge, to me it's, like, symbolic of a bridge, but also a bridge in time, like, the rainbow itself and the energies in the Alice Bailey sense. Because, I mean, as much as people like to, like, because they can't, I guess, balance out these things, and they just blame entire, like, people and stuff. Like, Alice Bailey has this weird bad rap just because she's associated technically with the United Nations and Lucis Trust and all that. But what she talks about with color, how they are, in a sense, like these energies, but intelligences, I think there's something to that, in the sense that, like, in a Kabbalistic resonance sense, color and just, there's a connection. Color is connection. And this whole idea of kalas, or essences, I don't know, it's a weird thing because we get confused. This whole question of the Qliphoth, the shells, and Malkuth. It's just funny. This what I was going to say about the 4 is I realized by, like, a simple not just even an alteration, but a realization of spelling caused me to realize that, like, the term hypostasis, and, like, the hypostasis of the archons, etc., like, in plural and considered as 4, like, the 4 hypostases would be 666. And it's just funny because it's essentially like the 4 worlds, but this funny sort of yin-yang balancing, which this whole Rice Seedling Sutra makes me think about. How essentially the seed becomes, whether, a tree, a flower, a Buddha, based on the DNA, essentially, but the DNA itself, like, which I saw, the DNA is 74. And also chain, and it talks about the chains, but and that's what these are. It's like and again, the circle and the square, 74, or Ayan Dawah, also makes me think of the whole Datu, what is it? Just I forgot what the term is for essentially Malkuth, or the sphere of the elements, but that's what it makes me think about. And so there is this weird interconnection, like a Huayan interpenetration, or interdependent arising, or codependent arising. Deep, I think it's really just called dependent arising, but of the seed and its, what it can become. And so, in a sense, that's why, again, this Lamed, or the path, the spectrum, the life path, or the timeline, in a sense, comes to mind. At least that's what I've been seeing. And so this whole thing about the seed and the seed, 93, 333, it's kind of funny, especially that interplay of Thelema and Acrasia, and really 426. Again, it's this knowing of these little, like, subtle pathways, I guess, of knowing, like, Samek and Shin interchange. And that's just one thing. There's a few little things that would make 666. There's a few that would make, like, the other triple numbers, just by simple logical interchanges of, the letters. And I don't know, trying to explain that in a simple way, it's like something I still struggle with, but I've known that, and it's just coming to find I've known this whole process, there was something to it, but trying to express it, I don't know, it's just, finding different ways, finding different illustrations. This whole Salistamba Sutra was just, I don't know, and very enlightening. You can actually read the PDF here of it gives the history of it, technically it's like, I think they had to reconstruct little portions, but it's like because it's one of the earliest Mahayana sutras, but obviously there's different terms, and it's just that the English Rice Seedling Sutra, it's like it's another Dharani in a sense to memorize or help these. It's just another mnemonic essentially. And so I don't know, from what I've found about Shingon, and I mean there's so many different other little offshoots of Zen, but the Pure Land Buddhism and all its different offshoots is very I don't know, like not just profound, but it's just, I don't know, it's very something I want to like learn more about. But also Tendai, or Tian, I think it's like Tian Tai, the lotus school essentially. And something Kenneth Grant talks about and comes to mind regarding all this, which is this whole idea of which the Egyptians considered it, like with the Nile, but they had lilies and lotuses as well. But this idea of like a lotus realm, or the lotuses being a sort of barrier or gateway between this present, or different realms, different Buddha lands essentially, or different samsaric existences. And in fact, I think I can let me see, pull up at least one quote. So he says, 8 is the number of the goddess Isis in her active face, referring to this particular verse of that section of Liber. 7 plus 1, or new Isis. Ba, Beth, Aleph, He, is the entrance or threshold, which confirms the allusion in the previous verse to the threshold of the Mav zone, situate in the marsh or Mav Malos. The marshland of Lower Egypt is the habitat of Dog, the fish, zootype of Dagon, an emissary of Cthulhu in the deep ones. 8, also Ba, the Nilotic inundation, which shows clearly its affinity with the mystical waters of Isis. The term further designates the god eaten by divine beings who dwell with hidden faces. Book of the Dead, chapter 65a. 8 is the number of the Templars, of the Octinimos of the Order or Ordo Templi Orientis. When displayed horizontally, the figure 8 symbolized universal domination. So it's like the Bagua. The Templars were commissioned to draw the secret wisdom from the land of the superior ancestors, i.e. the great old ones. The Oracle, 210, well describes the emptiness of this verse, for it is the number of the triple veil of the void. Ein Sof, Or, 0 being Ain as 70. The eye, or source of images, i.e. of objects. 3 times 70 is 210. The source of images is Ain, or Yoni, the O, or the 0. The Ain, 70, and the Ain, 61, are interchangeable terms, both indicating no thing. And so again, the eye and the rainbow, the color, the 7, both indicating no thing. 3 times 61 is 183, and 183 plus 210 is 393, the number of the Typhonian Sefek, the Kepsh of the 7 stars. And again, Sefek, which with Kepsh is at least one form, Kaf, Pei, Shin, and the Kaf and the Pei is very important, which I realized Kenneth Grant talks a lot about. Katius as 535, and then Pan being 131 plus 530, Pan Katius. It's essentially so many different OTO sort of Kabbalistic puns in the sense of being the all vagina in a sense, or the all mother, this womb in a sense, or this, I don't know, but also the phallus and the Katius. And in a sense, there's a being the mind, 666, this whole Buddhist idea of like the Buddha and Maya and him, I don't know, his mother being intimately connected to him, obviously, but also in a deep mental sort of sense. And again, the chitta times 3. There's just something to that. And so the number of the Typhonian, Sefek plus Kepsh, so 393 plus Kepsh is again 793, which is this Prajna Paramita, transplutonic New Isis, like goddess number in many ways. But in this labyrinth of the Anya. But anyway, whose earthly reflex is the scarlet woman or priestess who breeds the images of desire, illusion from the Ain, the Anya, nothingness, the not. Yet I watched it. So this whole idea of this nilotic inundation, or this water gateway, water doorway, is talked about like a lot by Seal Lion, but also I don't know, there's many analogs to that. And this idea of the rainbow and angles, essentially space and time, are integrally connected to the rainbow. And numbers essentially is one of the calibrating mechanisms. Spectral energy, essentially spectral energy, or essentially, what else? I mean, there's different ways of putting it, but dragon energies, dragon energies is 666. It's just funny, like some of it's just weird how, to me again, how like some of these people don't even see how pervasive it all is. But so yeah, this fire snake, the Haash Dracon, but yeah, this 210, this step ladder in a sense to the void. Again, it's being also cherub, the sword, the rainbow is the gateway to the source, essentially. So this, I don't know, it's just reading 73, or Liber 73, the urn, and the Sword of Song, which, I mean, it's not perfect, but Sword of Song is literally 67 less than 666. The urn, I'm not trying to find all these, it's just almost like, how does no one else not see this? But I mean, there's other ways, there's other like little keys, little Easter eggs, I guess you could say. But so the Shin Gon Nem Butsu, or the Amida, or the Amida Buddha Nem Butsu, like all equals 666, and it makes me wonder if it, because I mean it's not an evil number, it's literally just the 6, it's like a certain stage essentially. Again, the magnetic energy center, the 6 directions, which really they say there's 10 directions, but in 6 is like this, not quite middle, because 555 is the true middle, but a sort of certain, a bud, like a something that has yet to open fully, which the 777, 888, and 999 seem to symbolize, again with the Sahasrara chakra being 999, and that's like this inversion, this correct view of sunyata, this inversion of the void, which is that, again, this actuation process that Buddhism seems to just hit like right on the nail in so many different ways. But there's also Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light, and then the actual Namo Mitabhaya Buddhaya. Namo Mitabhaya Buddhaya. So like perfectly, Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light. Namo Mitabhaya Buddhaya. And so it's just weird. There's different, like, there's so many different things, but it's like this is the special instruction, in a sense, because that's what that equals, of the arcana, and of the tantras and shastras. So yeah, I had like found and like read and listened to this guy said that essentially the tantras and the or did I say tantras and shastras? Tantras and sutras are divided into like mother and father, which I had realized was 555, and I didn't really make the connection, but I'll just jump ahead to it. But like Sophia is the same as father essentially, but so mother Sophia, even though in a sense she's like a daughter. This whole thing, this connection to this idea of the daughter becoming the mother, or the connection between the mother and the daughter, kind of comes up. This overlay kind of can confuse things, but the 555 is very central to this mandala concept because it is the center of the mandala. But oh my god, there's so many things to it about, because it's also the, like, apparently the Brahma Rupa, or the Brahmapura, the city of Brahma, has many different like interpretations, but in a sense it is heaven. It's also, I think, the Buddhists, and this is kind of important, pure land, the Buddhists pure land, or the Pure Land Buddhists. So it's just funny. Samantabhadra comes to mind, obviously, like he's just sticking up in my mind right now, sitting on the elephant, and he's called universally worthy mostly, like that's the best, most common translation, but universally, and that's the two L's, the two lameds, universally good. Universally good is another translation of his name, and yet Manju, I think it's O, Manju Bosatsu, no. So Manju Manju Bosatsu, Japanese, the Manjusri Bodhisattva, essentially. Manju Bosatsu is 555, and they like sit together, or I mean, they ward the Buddha. I forget which one actually. Vairocana. I didn't want to say Vairocana, but I thought so. Vairocana is essentially, he's the celestial Buddha. I believe Amitabha, being the infinite light Buddha, may be similar. There's many different aspects, and like some are not even the same person, such as like Budai. Budai is the common laughing or fat Buddha or happy Buddha. Although he is considered like Maitreya, in a sense, like a reincarnation or incarnation. So yeah, this is all like old news to so many people because it's so old and ancient. But to me, just finding these codes, I've been really trying to collect them. And finding even that Buddha may have died from a mushroom or pork tainted with some sort of mushroom, in this book, Persephone's Quest. With the main reason I got it wasn't even because of Gordon Wasson or Jonathan Ott. It was actually because I was wondering what Stella Kramrisch was going to say. But this idea, again, of the lightning comes up a lot in here. There's so much to that idea, like, because it connects to Tibetan Buddhism. Daughters of the Thunder. But really, I don't know, this idea of the, what are they, this foot person, forgot what it's called. So it's kind of funny, the divine soma plant had only one leg, the stipe or stem, amsu in Sanskrit, of the mushroom. Amsu, again, being 107, and yet another word for soma, far less holy, is amsu. And so soma with vav as the O, essentially, which, like Liber O, is 6. Those whose function it was to handle the plants every day, receiving them, drying them, storing them, producing them for the offices, needed a word without the exalted attributes of soma. Some of the observers in Siberia have noted that the merchants string the plants together in threes, threading them together through the relatively tough stipes. Some such method must have been used in Vedic times, and here we have an explanation of the term, the art amsu. There was an imperious need for the word to serve that function. Do we not have it in amsu? Renew translates amsu felicitously by taj, stem, or stipe. So that's actually pretty important. Just this amsu or soma as 107, essentially also gold, and 107, the Buddha land being 107. So many different things, as I've said, but ulam, consciousness, but also ananda, bliss. And I don't know, it's just weird thinking about all that. But the lightning bolt and mushroom in chapter 2. But really, see, I'm digressing. This one chapter, the last meal of the Buddha, it says that he was like, basically, I don't want to read the whole thing, but he ate pork that was some, like, either tainted, possibly purposely, but it most likely had some sort of toxic mushroom. And I was like, didn't even have to look very hard, but Buddha plus mushrooms plus pig is 666, but also the Buddha ate tainted swine. And so yeah, it's just kind of interesting. That's what this literally says. That's where I got that idea. The Buddha ate tainted. And so that, but again, the 666 being like the parinirvana in so many different ways. Seshanaga, the Vishnu Dashavatara, sequence of lives, like the serpent's coils. It is this sort of sea of snakes, in a sense, like that the Huayan circles back around to make things like there's really never truly any death or darkness or mrityu, because it's all technically the river of Amrit. And so also like the river of Amrit, or Amrita, the being with Tethehe there. But just showing again the, like when you have them all together and seeing the variations, it helps to see that, like, I don't know, there's pictures literally in these sort of in these fields of data, and these fields of data are essentially kalas. I don't know, it's hard to say which way it all goes, because it doesn't go one way or another, and things just are, apparently. But that's what this the book, The Mission of Art, and art being that 210, that I, going back to the I, going back to the source, or coming from the source. Anyway, this whole thing about the mushroom and Buddha eating the mushroom, Buddha's mushroom pig. Buddha's mushroom pig. And really there's so many different things like chatra, madhu, which is pure honey, which mushrooms were stored in honey. And then, I mean, that makes me, there's so many different things, like the Chandogya Upanishad talks about the sun honey, and just the hexagrammic formula of that. And Deborah, the word, and the bee. There's something, the bee in Buddhism, there's something to this whole thing. And, you know, what is it? Deborah. Yeah, Deborah, and then so Ha Deborah is 222. I remember finding that. It's just funny how like these Hebrew words are given like in typical gematria manuscripts or whatever, but they don't give like certain little keys of knowing the true like spellings and the grammar and whatnot. Really, like not that really unlocks anything, but again, the context, when you add them all, like when you have a list and you just accumulate these realizations and these experiences in some instances, it's like there's a process where little rungs along the ladder of time, the Kala Chakra, and you could call it, like, get achieved, or if they miss the mark, or, you know, this whole, again, the concept of the buoy comes to mind. The buoy of Malkuth, as Dion Fortune calls it. Then again, there's always other, either, you know, whether you consider samsara good or bad, like there's always other potentials or opportunities, I guess. I don't know. It's just really, this has changed my outlook on so many things, and so many different things in the past have come up as being like, whoa, it's not only still like, now I see why it was relevant. I just didn't understand it very well. But anyway, I'll read the Salistamba Sutra and these other chapters that I had read of Persephone, and also, what was it, the Ancient Secret. And I don't know, there's just so many different, this Kabbalah of Nine Chambers, even as repetitive as it is, I think it's really is the key to so many of these things. Like this other name of this sword that the Ancient Secret talks about, Gram, or Grammar, with the R at the end, is 444, and has obvious sort of suggestions, I guess. And then also that Ha Shamir, that sort of laser, essentially, and the laser, and the lens, etc. With, again, these ideas of the lightning bolt and the rainbow have many different applications, and I just wonder how much people do or don't know about it. So, anyway, Unto Nuit. Unto Nuit. The Salistamba Sutra. In Sanskrit, Arya Salistamba Nama Mahayana Sutra. In Tibetan, Fogspa Salui Lejengpa Jez Biaba Thegpa Chen Poimdo. Homage to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Thus have I heard. At one time, the Lord was staying at Rajagriha on Vulture Peak Mountain with a large company of monks, 1,250 monks, and many bodhisattvas, mahasattvas. At that time, the Venerable Sariputra approached the place frequented by Maitreya Bodhisattva Mahasattva. When he approached, they exchanged many kinds of good and joyful words, and sat down together on a flat stone. Then the venerable Sariputra spoke thus to Maitreya Bodhisattva, Mahasattva. Maitreya, here today the Lord, looking upon a stalk of rice, spoke this aphorism to the monks. Whoever, monks, sees conditioned arising sees Dharma, and whoever sees Dharma sees the Buddha. Having said this, the Lord became silent. What, Maitreya, is the meaning of the aphorism spoken by the Lord? What is conditioned arising? What is Dharma? What is the Buddha? How is it that seeing conditioned arising one sees Dharma? How is it that seeing Dharma one sees the Buddha? When this was said, Maitreya Bodhisattva Mahasattva spoke thus to the Venerable Sariputra, Reverend Sariputra, regarding what was said by the Lord, the Master of Dharma, the Omniscient. He, monks, who sees conditioned arising, sees Dharma, and he who sees Dharma sees the Buddha. Therein, what is conditioned arising? The phrase conditioned means this being that occurs, from the arising of this that arises. That is to say, ignorance conditions mental formations. Mental formations condition consciousness. Consciousness conditions name and form. Name and form conditions the 6 sense entrances. The 6 entrances condition contact. Contact conditions sensation. Sensation conditions desire. Desire conditions grasping. Grasping conditions becoming. Becoming conditions birth. Birth conditions decay and death and grief, lamentation, suffering, depression, and anxiety arise. Thus, the arising of this entire great mass of suffering occurs. Similarly, from the cessation of ignorance, there is the cessation of mental formations. From the cessation of mental formations, there is the cessation of consciousness. From the cessation of consciousness, there is the cessation of name and form. From the cessation of name and form, there is the cessation of the 6 sense entrances. From the cessation of the 6 sense entrances, there is the cessation of contact. From the cessation of contact, there is the cessation of sensation. From the cessation of sensation, there is the cessation of desire. From the cessation of desire, there is the cessation of grasping. From the cessation of grasping, there is the cessation of becoming. And from the cessation of becoming, there is the cessation of birth. From the cessation of birth, decay and death, grief, lamentation, suffering, depression, and anxiety cease. Thus is the cessation of this entire great mass of suffering. This is called conditioned arising by the Lord. What is Dharma? It is the Noble Eightfold Path, namely right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This Noble Eightfold Path, the attainment of its fruits and nirvana rolled into one, is called Dharma by the Lord. What then is the Buddha, the Lord? He who, because he comprehends all dharmas, is called the Buddha, is endowed with the wisdom eye and the Dharma body. He sees the dharmas of both the learner and the learned. How then does one see conditioned arising? In this connection it is said by the Lord, whoever sees this conditioned arising, which is always and ever devoid of soul, truly undistorted, without soul, unborn, not become, not made, not compounded, unobstructed, inconceivable, glorious, fearless, ungraspable, inexhaustible, and by nature never stilled, he sees Dharma. And whoever sees Dharma, which is also always and ever devoid of soul, and by nature never stilled, he sees the unsurpassable Dharma body, the Buddha, by exertion based on right knowledge and clear understanding of the noble Dharma. Why is it called conditioned arising? It is causal and conditional. not non-causal and non-conditional. Therefore it is called conditioned arising. In this connection, the characteristics of conditioned arising are given in briefly by the Lord. Results come about by specific conditionality. Whether or not tathagatas or tathagatas arise, constant is this dharma nature, the constancy of dharma, the law of dharma, suchness, true suchness, changeless suchness, actuality, truth, reality, undistorted and immutable. Furthermore, this conditioned arising arises from two principles. From what two principles does it arise? From a causal relation and a conditional relation. Moreover, it should be seen as twofold, objective and subjective. What then is the causal relation in objective conditioned arising? It is as when a sprout comes from a seed, from the sprout a leaf, from the leaf a shoot, from the shoot a stalk, from the stalk a swelling, from the swelling a bud, from the bud a calyx, from the calyx a flower, and from the flower a fruit. When there is no seed, a sprout does not occur, and so on until when there is no flower, a fruit does not occur. But when there is a seed, the development of a sprout occurs, and soon until, when there is a flower, the development of a fruit occurs. It does not occur to the seed, I cause the sprout to develop, nor does it occur to the sprout, I am developed by the seed. And soon until it does not occur to the flower, I cause the fruit to develop, nor does it occur to the fruit, I am developed by the flower. But still, when there is a seed, the development, the manifestation of the sprout occurs, and so on until, when there is a flower, the development, the manifestation of the fruit occurs. This is the causal relation in objective conditioned arising to be seen. How is the conditional relation in objective conditioned arising to be seen? As the coming together of six factors. As the coming together of what six factors? Namely, as the coming together of the earth, water, heat, wind, space, and season factors is the conditional relation in objective conditioned arising to be seen. Therein, the earth factor performs the function of supporting the seed. The water factor waters the seed. The heat factor matures the seed. The wind factor brings out the seed. The space factor performs the function of not obstructing the seed. Season performs the function of transforming the seed. Without these conditions, the development of the sprout from the seed does not occur. But when the objective earth factor is not deficient, and likewise the water, heat, wind, space, and season factors are not deficient, then from the coming together of all these, when the seed is ceasing, the development of the sprout occurs. It does not occur to the earth factor, I perform the function of supporting the seed, and so on until it does not occur to season, I perform the functions of transforming the seed. Nor does it occur to the sprout, I am born by way of these conditions. But still, when there are these conditions, when the seed is ceasing, the development of the sprout occurs. And this sprout is not self-made, not made by another, not made by both, not made by God, not transformed by time, not derived from Prakriti, not founded upon a single principle, yet not arisen without cause. From the coming together of the earth, water, heat, wind, space, and season factors, when the seed is ceasing, the development of the sprout occurs. Thus is the conditional relation in objective conditioned arising to be seen. Therein, objective conditioned arising is to be seen according to 5 principles. What 5? Not as eternity, not as annihilation, not as transmigration of any essence, as the development of a large fruit from a small cause, and as a result bound to be similar to that, its cause. How is it to be seen as not eternity? Because the sprout is one thing and the seed another. That which is the seed is not the sprout, but still the seed ceases and the sprout arises. Therefore, eternity is not the case. How is it to be seen as not annihilation? Not from the previous cessation of the seed does the sprout issue forth, nor indeed without the cessation of the seed. But still the seed ceases, and at just that time the sprout arises, like the beam of a scale rocking to and fro. Therefore, annihilation is not the case. How is it to be seen as not transmigration? The seed and sprout are dissimilar. Therefore, transmigration is not the case. How is it to be seen as the development of a large fruit from a small cause? A small seed is sown, and it causes a large fruit to develop. Therefore, it is to be seen as the development of a large fruit from a small cause. How is it to be seen as a result bound to be similar to that, its cause? Whatever type of seed is sown, it causes that type of fruit to develop. Therefore, it is to be seen as a result bound to be similar to that, its cause. Thus is objective conditioned arising to be seen according to 5 principles. Thus, subjective conditioned arising also arises from 2 principles. From what 2? From a causal relation and a conditional relation. What then is the causal relation in subjective conditioned arising? It is as follows. Ignorance conditions mental formations. Mental formations condition consciousness. Consciousness conditions name and form. Name and form conditions the 6 sense entrances. The 6 sense entrances condition contact. Contact conditions sensation. Sensation conditions desire. Desire conditions grasping. Grasping conditions becoming. Becoming conditions birth. Birth conditions decay and death. And grief, lamentation, suffering, depression, and anxiety come to be. Thus, the arising of this entire great mass of suffering occurs. Were there no ignorance, mental formations would not be known, and so on until, were there no birth, decay, and death would not be known. But when there is ignorance, the development of mental formations occurs, and so on until, when there is birth, the development of decay and death occurs. Herein it does not occur to ignorance. I cause the mental formations to develop, nor does it occur to the mental formations we are developed by ignorance, and so on until it does not occur to birth, I develop decay and death, nor does it occur to decay and death, I am developed by birth. But still, when there is ignorance, the development, the manifestation of mental formations occurs. And so on until, when there is birth, the development, the manifestation of decay and death occurs. Thus, the causal relation in subjective conditioned arising is to be seen. How is the conditional relation in subjective conditioned arising to be seen? As due to the coming together of 6 factors. As due to the coming together of what 6 factors? Namely, as due to the coming together of the earth, water, heat, wind, space, and consciousness factors in the conditional relation in subjective conditioned arising to be seen. Therein, what is the earth factor in subjective conditioned arising? That which by conglomeration causes the solid nature of the body to develop is called the earth factor. That which performs the cohesion function of the body is called the water factor. That which digests what is eaten, drunk, or consumed for the body is called the heat factor. That which performs the body's function of inhalation and exhalation is called the wind factor. That which causes hollowness to develop inside the body is called the space factor. That which causes name and form to develop, mutually supported like reeds in a sheaf, is called the consciousness factor, associated with the 5 consciousness bodies in defiled mind consciousness. Without these conditions, the arising of the body does not occur. But if the subjective earth factor is not deficient, and likewise the water, heat, wind, space, and consciousness factors are not deficient, then because of all these factors coming together, the arising of the body occurs. Therein it does not occur to the earth factor, I cause the solid nature of the body to develop, nor does it occur to the water factor, I perform the cohesion function of the body, nor does it occur to the heat factor, I digest what is eaten, drunk, or consumed for the body, nor does it occur to the wind factor, I perform the body's function of inhalation and exhalation, nor does it occur to the space factor, I cause hollowness to develop inside the body, nor does it occur to the consciousness factor, I cause the body to develop, nor does it occur to the body, I am born by way of these conditions. But still, when there are these conditions, because of their coming together, the arising of the body occurs. Therein, the earth factor is not self, not a being, not a soul, not a creature, not human, not a person, not female, not male, not neuter, not I, not mine, and not any others. Likewise, the water factor, heat factor, wind factor, space factor, and consciousness factor are not self, not a being, not a soul, not a creature, not human, not a person, not female, not male, not neuter, not I, not mine, and not any others. Therein, what is ignorance? That which perceives these same 6 factors as a unit, as a lump, as permanent, as constant, as eternal, as pleasant, as self, as a being, as a soul, a person, a human, a man, as making I or making mine, and so on, into manifold misapprehension, that is called ignorance. When there is this ignorance, greed, hatred, and delusion develop in relation to the sense spheres. Greed, hatred, and delusion in relation to the sense spheres are called mental formations. The discrete appearance of objects is consciousness. The 4 non-material grasping aggregates which arise together with consciousness are name. Name, together with the 4 great elements in derived matter, is name and form. The sense faculties connected with name and form are the 6 sense entrances. The conjunction of 3 things is contact. The experience of contact is sensation. Clinging to sensation is desire. The expansion of desire is grasping. Action born out of grasping and giving rise to rebirth is becoming. The manifestation of the aggregates caused by becoming is birth. The maturing of the born aggregates is decay. The perishing of the worn-out aggregates is death. The internal burning of the deluded, attached, dying person is grief. Giving vent to grief is lamentation. The experience of unpleasantness associated with the 5 consciousness bodies is suffering. Mental suffering associated with the mind is depression, and whatever other subtle defilements there are of this sort are anxiety. It is called ignorance in the sense of making great blindness, mental formations in the sense of formation, consciousness in the sense of causing to know, name and form in the sense of mutual support, 6 sense entrances in the sense of entrance doors, sensual contact in the sense of contacting, feeling in the sense of experiencing, desire in the sense of thirsting, grasping in the sense of grasping, becoming in the sense of giving birth to repeated becoming, birth in the sense of manifestation of the aggregates, decay in the sense of maturing of the aggregates, death in the sense of perishing, grief in the sense of grieving, lamentation in the sense of verbal lamentation, suffering in the sense of bodily torment, depression in the sense of mental torment, anxiety in the sense of subtle defilement. Otherwise, not arriving at reality, arriving at falsehood, misapprehension is ignorance. Thus, when there is ignorance, the threefold mental formations develop, leading to advantage, leading to disadvantage, and leading to stability. As a result of the mental formations leading to advantage, advantageous consciousness occurs. As a result of the mental formations leading to disadvantage, disadvantageous consciousness occurs. As a result of the mental formations leading to stability, stable consciousness occurs. This is called consciousness conditioned by mental formations. As for consciousness conditioned name and form, the four non-material aggregates, sensations, etc., cause bending into existence here and there, and so are called name. This name which accompanies form, plus form itself, is called name and form. By the growth of name and form, through the six sense entrance doors, activities develop. This is called the six sense entrances conditioned by name and form. Because of the six sense entrances, the six contact bodies develop. This is called contact conditioned by the six sense entrances. Whatever type of contact occurs, that type of sensation develops. This is called sensations conditioned by contact. That which, by discriminating those sensations, causes one to relish, that which delights, clings, and clingings remains, and what is called desire conditioned by sensations. Thus, relishing, delighting, and clinging, there is non-renunciation, the repeated wish. May these dear forms, delightful forms, not be separated from me. This is called grasping conditioned by desire. This wishing causes rebirth, producing karma to arise by means of body, speech, and mind. This is called becoming conditioned by grasping. The development of the aggregates born as a result of that karma is called birth conditioned by becoming. Due to increase and maturity, the perishing of the aggregates developed by birth occurs. This is called decay and death conditioned by birth. Thus, this 12-fold conditioned arising with interdependence of causes and interdependence of conditions, not impermanent, not permanent, not compounded, not uncompounded, not without cause, not without condition, not an experiencer, not a destructible thing, not a ceasing thing, not a perishable thing, not proceeding from primordial time, not cut off, rolls along like a flowing stream. As this conditioned arising, not cut off, rolls along like a flowing stream, four limbs of this 12-fold conditioned arising develop through the process causality for performing the action of assembling. What for? Namely, ignorance, desire, karma, and consciousness. Therein, consciousness is a cause by being of the nature of a seed. Karma is a cause by being of the nature of a field. Ignorance and desire are a cause by being of the nature of defilement. Karma defilements cause the consciousness seed to be born. Therein, karma performs the function of being the field of the consciousness seed. Desire waters the consciousness seed. Ignorance scatters the consciousness seed. Without these conditions, the development of the consciousness seed does not occur. Therein it does not occur to karma. I perform the function of being the field of the consciousness seed. It does not occur to desire. I water the consciousness seed. It does not occur to ignorance. I scatter the consciousness seed. nor does it occur to the consciousness seed, I am born by way of these conditions. And so the consciousness seed grows, standing in the karma field, watered by the moisture of desire, scattered by ignorance. Here and there in the entrances of arising, it causes the sprout of name and form to develop through rebirth in a mother's womb. And this sprout of name and form is not self-made, not made by another, not made by both, not made by God, not transferred by time, not derived from Prakriti, not founded upon a single principle, yet not arisen without cause. And so, from the union of the mother and the father in the fertile period, and by the conjunction of other conditions, the consciousness seed, permeated by appetite, causes the sprout of name and form to develop in a mother's womb, in relation to things which are not governed, not mine, not possessed, not opposed, like space, of the nature of the marks of illusion, due to the non-deficiency of causes and conditions. Furthermore, I-consciousness arises by way of 5 principles. What 5? Namely, conditioned by I, form, light, space, and appropriate attention. I-consciousness arises. Therein, the I performs the function of being the basis of I-consciousness. Form performs the function of being the object. Light performs the function of illumination. Space performs the function of uncovering. Appropriate attention performs the function of reflection. Without these conditions, I-consciousness does not arise. But if the subjective I entrance is not deficient in form, light, space, and appropriate attention are not deficient, then from the conjunction of all these, I-consciousness arises. Therein it does not occur to the I perform the function of being the basis of I-consciousness. Nor does it occur to space, I perform the uncovering function of I-consciousness. Nor does it occur to appropriate attention, I perform the reflection function of I-consciousness. Nor does it occur to I-consciousness, I am born by way of these conditions. But still, there being these conditions, the arising of I-consciousness occurs, because of their conjunction. Thus, a corresponding analysis of the remaining sense faculties should be done. Therein there is nothing whatsoever that transmigrates from this world to another world. There is only the appearance of the fruit of karma, because of the non-deficiency of causes and conditions. It is, monks, like the reflection of a face seen in a well-polished mirror. No face transmigrates into the mirror, but there is the appearance of a face because of the non-deficiency of causes and conditions. Thus there is nothing departed from this world, nor arisen elsewhere. There is only the appearance of the fruit of karma, because of the non-deficiency of causes and conditions. It is, monks, like the moon disk which wanders 4,000 leagues above, and yet again the moon's reflection is seen in a small pool of water. It does not depart from its station in the sky above, and transmigrate into the small pool of water, but there is the appearance of the moon disk because of the deficiency of causes and conditions. Thus there is nothing departed from this world, nor arisen elsewhere. There is only the appearance of the fruit of karma because of the non-deficiency of causes and conditions. Just as when there is fuel as a condition, fire burns, and if fuel is deficient it does not burn. Even so does the consciousness seed, born of karma defilements, cause the sprout of name and form to develop here and therein the entrances of arising, through rebirth in a mother's womb, in relation to things which are not governed, not mine, not possessed, not opposed, like space, of the nature of the marks of illusion, due to the non-deficiency of causes and conditions. Thus is the conditional relation and subjective conditioned arising to be seen. Furthermore, subjective conditioned arising is to be seen according to 5 principles. What 5? Not as eternity, not as annihilation, not as transmigration, as the development of a large fruit from a small cause, and as a result bound to be similar to that its cause. How is it to be seen as not eternity? Because the aggregates on the edge of death are one thing, and the aggregates sharing arising are another. The aggregates on the edge of death are not identical to those sharing arising, but still the aggregates on the edge of death cease, and the aggregates sharing arising become manifest. Therefore, eternity is not the case. How is it to be seen as not annihilation? The aggregates sharing arising do not become manifest for the previous cessation of the aggregates on the edge of death, nor without this cessation. But still the aggregates on the edge of death cease, and at just that time the aggregates sharing arising become manifest, like the beam of a scale rocking to and fro. Therefore, annihilation is not the case. How is it to be seen as not transmigration? Dissimilar species cause birth to develop in a common category of birth. Therefore, transmigration is not the case. How is it to be seen as the development of a large fruit from a small cause? A small deed, karma, is done, and a large resultant fruit is experienced. Therefore, the development of a large fruit from a small cause is the case. How is it to be seen as an effect bound to be similar to that its cause? Whatever type of deed, karma, is done, that same type of result is experienced. There, the effect is bound to be similar to that its cause. Thus is subjective conditioned arising to be seen in 5 ways. Whoever, Venerable Sariputra with perfect wisdom, sees this conditioned arising, perfectly set forth by the Lord, as it actually is, always and ever without soul, devoid of soul, truly undistorted, unborn, not become, not made, not compounded, unobstructed, unobscured, glorious, fearless, ungraspable, inexhaustible, and by nature never stilled. Whoever sees it well and fully as unreal, as vanity, void, unsubstantial, as a sickness, a boil, a dart, as dangerous, impermanent, suffering, as empty and without self. Such a one does not reflect upon the past, thinking, was I in the past or was I not? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? Nor again does he reflect upon the future, thinking, will I be in the future or will not be? What will be in the future? How will I be in the future? Nor again does he reflect upon the present, thinking, what is this? How is this? Being what? What will we become? Where does this being come from? Where will it go when departed from here? Whatever dogmas the common world's ascetics and priests hold, that is to say, dogmas related to belief in self, belief in a being, belief in soul, belief in a person, rites and rituals, fully recognized as false, cut off at the root, withered like the plume of a taliput palm, dharmas never to arise or cease again in the future. Whosoever, Venerable Sariputra, thus endowed with patience in the Dharma, understands conditioned arising perfectly. For him, the Tathagata, the Noble One, the perfectly, completely enlightened One, endowed with perfect wisdom and conduct, the Wayfarer, knower of all worlds, incomparable charioteer of men needing taming, teacher of gods and men, the Buddha, the Lord, predicts unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment, saying, he will become a perfect, complete Buddha. A. Then indeed the venerable Sariputra, delighted and joyful at the words of Maitreya Bodhisattva Mahasattva, rose from his seat, and the other monks also departed. B. Thus spoke Maitreya Bodhisattva Mahasattva, and the venerable Sariputra, together with the world of gods, men, titans, and sprites, delighted, rejoiced at the words of Maitreya Bodhisattva Mahasattva. The Ancient Secret in Search of the Holy Grail by Flavia Anderson, Chapter 8. The Oracular Head in the Wounded Thigh. Brandigan, the stalagmite witch of Wookiee, is none other than the loathly damsel, who supports the head of the dead knight in her lap, and who reproached Parzival because, on his first visit to the hall of the Grail King, he had not inquired concerning the mysteries. We must now face, unpleasant as it is, the question of why the dead knight's face was black, and what is the significance of all the oracular heads of which legend tells. The blackness indicates that the head is embalmed. That of Osiris was preserved at Abydos, and that of Orpheus at Lesbos, both sanctuaries being oracular. King Saul's head was hung in the temple of Dagon by the Philistines. Odin was accustomed to consult the decapitated head of the dwarf Mimir. Bran, the hero of the story of Branwen's Cauldron, was decapitated by his followers, but his head continued to utter for many years. Cuchulainn's father's head had the same property. In the Mabinogion, Peredur sees a head carried in procession in the castle of the Lame King. In the Grand Saint Grail, Joseph sees an angel issue from the Ark of the Grail bearing a head. In the Conte du Grail, the head of the Grail King's enemy, Partinal, the Knight of the Red Tower, is placed by Percival on a pike above the Grail Castle's tower. This head of Partinal is really identical with that of the stag for which Percival goes hunting. Cernunnos, the stag-headed god of the Gauls, is the divine youth himself. The youths dedicated to death in the precinct of Zeus Lycaeus were called deer according to Plutarch. See Zeus by A.B. Cook, Volume 1, page 67. In Greece he was called Actaeon, and in Scotland the Hind Knight, or Old Horny, meaning the devil. No doubt some headdress of antlers was worn by the divine youth, dating from the days when the reindeer was man's principal meat, and his totem beast. Christian legend transferred the horns to the devil because of their fear and hatred of the old abuses. In conclusion, the Templars, who may have indulged in occult practices, were accused by the papacy of worshipping a head. All this may not, perhaps, be as sinister as it at first appears. I have heard it suggested that the Celtic vessel known as the Cauldron of the Head of Hades, and the Cauldron of Branwen, which restored men to life, may have been an iron-cooking vessel in which the Egyptian or Cretan settlers had taught the flint-bag men to mix the substances necessary for a rough-and-ready form of embalmment. This is probably the truth, and the cauldrons of Celtic myth which restore men to life are almost certainly of this category, and should not be confused with the pearl-rimmed metal mirror, which supplies inexhaustible riches. The habit of preserving an oracular head seems to have originated in Egypt, but the story of Osiris and his dismemberment will lose some of its horrors if we try to realize the pathetic irony of the tale. In pre-dynastic times there arrived in the Nile Valley, according to the Egyptian record, records, two strangers, Osiris and his wife, who was later identified with the earth goddess Isis. From where they came we shall never know.
Perhaps it was from some lost Atlantis. Perhaps Osiris is none other than Ham, son of Noah, whom the scriptures tell us went and dwelt in Egypt and gave his name Chem to that land. Be that as it may, Osiris found the flint-bag men of Egypt to be food gatherers rather than food producers, and he taught them to grow corn, and to spin, and to give up the evil customs of their religious ritual. But just because he was such a good and holy and wise leader, all the more would his body be powerful, thought the simple folk, to fertilize their fields, and his head would bring them counsel. So they dismembered him, and in tears the queen, Isis, went forth throughout the land to recover the remains and give them reverent burial. I have given the story of Osiris as it is generally understood, but I am not at all sure that we have understood it correctly. The enemy, Set or Typhon, who slew him, may have symbolized death in the abstract, and the simple folk may have dismembered his body after his natural death, and preserved his relics, just as the bones of the saints were discovered and preserved. Nevertheless, the relic of a saint, or an Osiris, is, as a witness or reminder that God can dwell in man, a source of power, and therefore capable of abuse as power always is. An account of how a head can be made to appear oracular by an unscrupulous ventriloquist is given in Rudyard Kipling's story in the House of Sudhu. There is no doubt that the desire to acquire such power-giving relics did in the end lead men to commit ritual murder, but this may have been a development rather than the origin of the custom. We should not always jump to the conclusion that primitive man was bloodthirsty. As an instance, it has always been presumed that the flesh of Dionysus was torn to pieces by the Titans, but the Titans lured him into their power by means of a mirror. Is it possible that the body of the god was fire, and that it was the fire which the Titans divided? Compare the Roman Catholic office of blessing the candle on Holy Saturday. They take a newly lit reed and from it light the great Paschal candle, saying as they do so, "Now also we know the praises of this column, which the shining fire enkindles to the honor of God, which, although divided into parts, suffers no detriment from the light being borrowed." See also Legends of the Jews by Louis Ginsberg. He, Moses, was like a burning candle from which many others are lighted, but which is not therefore diminished. Volume 3, page 1, and for sources, Volume 6, Moses, note 479. Mr. Charles Mountford, in his book Brown Men in Red Sand, describes the primitive food gatherers of Australia as a delightful if simple people who are as horrified at the thought of cannibalism or ritual murder as we should be. It is always the fabulous folk from remote distances who are supposed to commit such atrocities. This fact is an encouraging thought when we come to consider the significance of the lameness of the Grail King. Mr. Robert Graves, in his book King Jesus, has produced an explanation which it would be well to refute. Mr. Graves was adroit in being the first to realize that some mystery probably lies concealed in the fact that so many solar heroes are wounded in the foot or thigh. To mention only a few, Achilles is wounded in the heel, Vulcan, god of fire, is thrown out of heaven by Juno and is lamed in his fall, Adonis is wounded in the thigh by a wild boar, so is Ulysses, Oedipus is club-footed, in India Krishna is incarnated as a stag and is wounded in the foot, Bran receives a mortal injury to his leg. Mr. Graves traces the origin of all these legends to the occasion when Jacob wrestled with an angel, and he postulates a theory that the divine youth always underwent a ritual mutilation by having his hip bone torn out of joint. It is true that a man could survive such a permanent dislocation, but only in the greatest agony. He would be quite incapacitated and unable to fulfill his functions, which certainly included the begetting of children. It would not be worthwhile to discuss such a postulation had Mr. Graves not chosen to suppose it an ancient Jewish custom, and to have described in his half-historical, half-fictional life of our Lord a repulsive ceremony in which Christ himself willingly undergoes such a mutilation. To suppose that any Jew of the period would have lent himself to such practices, and Jesus conformed strictly to Jewish custom, is a supposition so ludicrous as hardly to need answering. Nevertheless, I have met with some innocent enough to have been cast down by such an assault to faith. And as the answer to the mystery of the lameness of so many heroes is to be found in the Grail legend, if anywhere, I shall go into the matter in some detail. I do not pretend that I am certain of the answer, but the reader will find a list of possibilities, all of them more likely than the Mr. Graves theory. The difficulty is that there are so many possible and plausible explanations from which to choose, but I think there are two obvious interpretations which must be added to any final solution, though neither may be in itself a full answer. I give these two obvious interpretations first. 1. It is plain that these Celtic lays contain a hidden lament for the ritual which Christianity abolished, and that sympathetic magic played a part in the ritual. If only the Grail could once again be carried to the Hill of Healing. If only the Grail could once again be carried to the Hill of Healing, then the wasteland would flourish, so they thought. Then the regeneration of sun and earth and of the vegetation god, the divine youth, would be effected. Sir Flinders Petrie, commenting on Plutarch's Isis and Osiris, Sir F. Petrie in Personal Religion in Egypt Before Christianity, page 128, explains that the legend of Zeus, or Amen, being unable to walk because his legs were united until Isis separated them, is in reality an account of Min, another form of Osiris, having his legs bound together in mummy wrappings in the way that the Egyptian god of the dead is always portrayed. To separate the legs meant to restore him to life, and the Amen form. The cure of the lame king is therefore in part a story of the regeneration of nature's powers in springtime. 2. The other point which must be noted only so far as the Celtic lays are concerned is this. At a time when they were beginning to sing these lays in honor of King Arthur, who was probably of Roman blood and represented the last of Roman culture in Britain, the Emperor Justin in Byzantium happened to be suffering from an incurable spear thrust which he had got in battle, and which Gibbon locates in the thigh. The emperor languished for years, and had to depute all authority to his nephew Justinian. It is more than likely that the septic wound would have been treated, as Pliny describes, by cauterizing with the sun's rays through a crystal ball. Amfortas, holding the Grail spear to his wound, is therefore none other than the Emperor Justin, of whom the Celts of Britain had heard, and who was surrounded in their imagination by all the pomp and majesty of Roman authority. 3. The legend of a lame hero, however, is much older than the beginning of the 6th century A.D. Mr. Graves is probably correct in supposing that the story goes back at least as early as Jacob, and this is very clearly shown in Grail legend. For the medieval poets have made a fearful confusion, or possibly an intentional identification, between Joseph of Arimathea and Jacob's most famous son. Almost the whole of de Boron's Grant St. Grail, which concerns the adventures of St. Joseph before his arrival in Britain, is really founded on the story of the arrival of the Hebrews in Goshen. Saint Joseph is drawn up from a pit or dungeon, wherein his Jewish brethren have cast him. Then he and his company proceed to Saris, a land bordering that of Egyptian Ptolemy. Here his son Josephus interprets the king's dreams, and here Saint Joseph is wounded in the thigh by an angel. De Boron's account of how Moises desires to sit in the perilous seat at Saint Joseph's Grail table, and how the earth opens to receive him alive into the abyss, is yet another instance of how the Grail legend is largely founded on Old Testament stories. See Numbers 16:33 for the account of how Korah, who aspired to serve in the tabernacle, met an exactly similar end. 4. I have already postulated one theory, that as the Greeks used the same word, silex, both for a shallow bowl-shaped cup and for the acetabulum of a man's pelvis, the story may originate in the striking of the sun's rays upon a concave mirror. The word which the authorized version of the Bible translates as the hollow of Jacob's thigh is actually the word kaph, from which root we derive our word cup. The acetabulum of a large animal's pelvic bone was probably the very first cup or ladle ever used by primitive man, if one excludes the gourd, and one can see that later on confusion might arise between the hollow of a man's hip joint and a manufactured cup. This theory would be supported by the story of Dionysus. He was born of Zeus in Semele. The name of the latter is only the Phrygian for earth. At her request, Zeus displayed himself to her in lightning. I have no doubt that the original meaning was that he displayed himself in descending light, i.e. sunlight, and a sun-begotten torch. Cadmus, father of Semele, gave the name of lightning to the earthly fire he kindled, called the flame of torches, the spark of the thunderbolt. Nonnus Dionysiaca 44:180. See also the Assyrian comparison of the lightning which comes out of the sun like a thunderbolt, in A Dictionary of Assyrian Chemistry and Geology by Dr. R. Campbell Thompson, page 89. She was so appalled by his majesty that she died, but Zeus saved her child, Dionysus, from the flames and sewed him up, or concealed him, in his own thigh till he came to maturity. Then Zeus brought him forth, so that he was twice born. In other words, the light issuing from the silex cup of Zeus the Savior consecrated an initiate, a fully adult man who underwent ritual rebirth. It might follow from this that the god who came down in descending light was bent in order to form fire. Thus, Camulod, the tutelary god of Camulodunum in Britain, does not signify lightning any more than Zeus descended upon Semele in lightning, but means that the rays were bent by refraction. The fire god, or immortal double of the king, is not therefore lame, but bent. If this is true, it raises a most interesting question as to how much the ancients really knew about the science of optics. 5. Just as the Christian Arthur was credited after death with the characteristics of the sun god, so no doubt was the Hebrew Jacob, for he was the father of 12 sons, who equate most conveniently with the months of the year. The story of the injury to his thigh might therefore concern the sun's wrestling with a celestial power in the vicinity of the group of stars known in Egypt as the thigh. Certainly the various names of this group of stars, which we know as the plough, coincide in most curious fashion with certain episodes in Grail legend. The Arabs know it as the beer, which we have seen is always present in the hall of the Grail King. In India, the stars are the 7 celestial rishis, who accompanied and guided the ark of the Indian Noah. The Saxons called it the churl's wain, or peasant's cart. and Chrestian de Troyes wrote a long epic poem about a peasant's cart called the Chevalier de la Charrette. It was a great disgrace to be seen driving in such a vehicle, at least for a Christian knight. Nevertheless, Lancelot mounted in it and endured the mockery of the country folk in order to get to Avalon and rescue the queen, who had been imprisoned by the lord of the island of the glass, Lisire de l'Isle d'Ivoire. Whether or not the same group of stars has any association with the traditional Jewish mystery of the chariot, I must leave to those Jewish rabbis, if any, who still retain any knowledge of the mystery. I have heard of an ingenious theory whereby, so it is claimed, all the myths of Egypt and Greece can be interpreted. A Polish gentleman first put forward the theory, but it was not, alas, published in written form, so that I am unable to give it in detail. His postulation was that the pole star represented the tree of life. It was certainly believed to be the seat of Anu, the Chaldean sky god. See Professor Maspero's Dawn of Civilization, page 65. And there are phrases in classical writings which suggest that Jupiter also ruled from that point. The theory briefly is that since most stars and planets rise and set, they are bound upon what the Buddhists would call a wheel of reincarnation, and man must also return with them to earth in sorrow, unless his soul can win to the unturning point, which is paradise, which he will need no further schooling upon earth. If the theory were correct, it would explain why in the carving on the ceiling of the temple at Dendera, figure 1, the spear of the sun god or solar hero is directed with such special enmity at the polar stars of the thigh or plough and Draconis. For these two groups of stars never rise or set, but like a guard of wheeling cherubim, revolve widdershins about the tree of life, or pole star, to keep men from the fruit. There are certainly grounds for supposing that man translated in his imagination the little tree of Glacier to a celestial sphere, the world tree, Yggdrasil, with its branches in the stars. And he did this because he was no longer satisfied with the descent of the fire from the dawn horizon, but was urgently demanding the descent of the Holy Spirit from a higher sphere. His imagination, therefore, have conceived a celestial Grail tree in the vicinity of the pole star. There are many hints in Grail legend that the mystery concerns the secrets of astronomy. Wolfram von Eschenbach says that the Jew, Phlegetonus, who lived in Toledo, found the secret of the Grail within a group of stars. The jeweled chessmen, which play of themselves, with Percival and Maytim, are perhaps the stars. The checkered board is the astronomical chart, and the moat into which Percival threatens to throw them is Oceanus, which surrounds the world. In the legends of the Moorish Alhambra, a similar myth would bear this out. But added to the stellar interpretation of the chessmen is the fact that it was an Egyptian custom to provide the dead with a type of draught board in the tomb for the distraction of the soul, and in the folk tale of Setna in the Magic Book, see Egyptian Tales, 2nd series by Sir Flinders Petrie, the neophyte who seeks the hermetic writings of magic and initiation plays at draughts with the soul of a dead prince in his tomb. Whichever of the two interpretations gave rise to the Celtic legend, the meaning is really the same. Percival, playing chess with an invisible opponent, is the neophyte attempting to pierce the secrets of the kingdom of the dead, and to acquire power over the celestial or stellar sphere. To be wounded in the vicinity of the thigh by a heavenly power might therefore mean no more than that a man had failed to win through the guard of the turning cherubim who protect the tree of paradise, or that having received a visionary revelation of God, the man was then flung back into this mundane existence. 6. I have left until last the theory to which I personally incline most, and which I believe to be the correct answer to the puzzle, which is so simple and so probable. The clue lies in the name of the Grail King, who was known as the Rich Fisher, and who is none other than the Egyptian god Thoth. The ibis, with its beautiful white and black plumage, was his sacred bird, his totem sign, and he was represented after the Egyptian fashion, not with a human head, but as a man with the bald pate and long beak of the bird who is the enemy of serpents. Thoth in his true character was not, I think, originally a god or even a solar hero. He was the great high priest, who served both men and gods. His story almost certainly originated in the life of a great and wise man, and he gradually combined in his personality all those leaders of thought who have struggled patiently to lead men to light and knowledge, and at last into the presence of God. He was the initiator, as distinct from the initiated. He was the great master of all initiation ceremonies. He was the master of magic and the spoken word, the inventor of writing, arithmetic, and geometry. He first measured time and devised the calendar. He controlled the solar bark by his incantations. He is the old bald-headed man who in the prose Percival steers the ark in which Percival lies asleep. He is Dwidno Garanhir, the lofty crane, priest of the ship, to whom the Welsh bards refer, and whose office it was, according to Mr. Edward Davies, see Mythology and Rites of the British Druids, to conduct the novitiates through their initiations. Gwydno owned the magic basket, one of the 13 wonderful treasures of Britain, and he was the legendary king whose land was flooded in a great inundation, i.e., he was associated in legend with very ancient and perhaps antediluvian times. Thoth was judge of disputes and messenger of the gods, and the Egyptians believed that he transported their souls safely across the abyss to the halls where Osiris judged the dead. There he weighed the heart of the dead man against the feather of truth, tipped the scales in the dead man's favor, if it were possible, and acted as advocate for the departed. He was the recording angel, who then inscribed the sum of men's good deeds upon his tablets. He watched with jealous care over the divine eye, the missing eye, which Horus had entrusted to him. This certainly refers to the moon and the measuring of time by it, but it may also include a charge of the moon goblet or crystal grail. He was god of riches. See Dawn of Civilization by Professor Maspero, page 42. His cult had its center at Hermopolis, where he had charge of the hermetic or sealed books of initiation. In Greece he was given the name of Hermes, and the Hellenes believed that it was he who bestowed hidden treasure upon men. It was Hermes who escorted Persephone from Hades, and until the 5th century BC, he was represented in Greek art as a full-grown man with a beard, long robe, and a priestly hat. In Rome, as god of riches, he took his name Mercury from Merx, because he was the patron of merchants, and he was represented as carrying a purse. Caesar tells us that Mercury was the chief god of the Gauls. Gallic War, Book 6, Chapter 17. But the Celts did not represent him in the mundane Roman fashion as a flighty youth who was the patron of greedy traders and tricksters. To the Gauls and Britons he was still the bestower of the hidden treasure of mystic knowledge, the lofty crane, the fisher of the Nile. As Abu Haines, father of fishers, a type of ibis, though not the sacred variety, can still today be seen along the banks of the Nile. He stands in the water, his white feathers shining in the sun, his eyes alert to catch the movements of the reptiles on which he feeds, his long curved beak ready to attack the serpent of evil, and because he is a wader, he draws one foot up and balances on the other. He is the one-legged or lame fisher king. In the words of Théophile Gautier, immobile sur son pied Grail, l'ibis le bec dans son jabot, déchiffré au bot de quelque stella, le cartouche sacré des thoughts. Mr. Charles Montfort, in his book Brown Men and Red Sand, describes the enchanting initiation dances of the Australian Aborigines, the skill with which they depict the gait and movements of the birds and beasts, whom they believe to have been their totemistic ancestors, the delight which they take into the traditional staging of these archaic ballets, and the innocence and charm of the whole performance. Those who have read the book will realize how easily and simply the followers of the sacred ibis, the great high priest Thoth, would have imitated his most obvious characteristic, of standing first with one leg drawn up, and then with the other. If we examine some of the earliest legends about a lame king, we find that the limping results from an association with water. Jason comes out of the water limping and with only one sandal. Achilles is held by the heel in the river Styx. Adonis is wounded beside the river Litany. Jacob's wrestling feat takes place beside the ford of Jabbok. Genesis 32:22. Joshua, the ford of Jericho, is told to take off one shoe because the ground is holy. Joshua 5:15. In neither of these Bible stories does Scripture state that it was an angel who appeared to Jacob and Joshua. The word angel is always confusing in biblical stories because the Hebrew means no more than messenger, and distinction is not always correctly drawn between a terrestrial and a celestial messenger. But in both these last stories it is stated quite definitely that it was a man who confronted both Jacob and Joshua. Only afterwards did Jacob claim that he had seen the face of God, meaning, I think, that the man had brought him a revelation of a divine character. If I am right, the lameness of so many kings and demigods had no sinister significance. There was nothing physically wrong with them. The so-called lameness or uneven gait was the first step towards a man's baptism into the mysteries. The great master, representing Thoth, stood in the shallow water, and the neophyte removed one shoe, and followed him into the river, holding his sandaled foot high in imitation of the sacred ibis. Later, in stately dances, he would signify to his brethren, by his raising of first one foot and then the other, that he also had taken the first steps on the path of the initiate. No doubt these stately measures could grow wilder as the enthusiasm of a more barbaric people lent tempo to the music. Those who enjoy the ballet and have a sense of rhythm will understand how the priests of the Phoenician Baal leaped and halted on the occasion of Elijah's sacrifice on Mount Carmel. Mr. Graves, who postulates a ritual mutilation to their hip joints, should be invited to witness Scottish reel dancing and the skill with which a Scot or a Breton can leap and give a double beat of one foot against the calf of his other leg. It is possible that this particular feat was originally performed in honor of the lame fisher king, but no man who had suffered a real injury to his hip could achieve it. The family of the common grain which frequents Egypt and still bred in Britain in the 16th century AD is noted for its ceremonial dance. I quote from the Handbook of British Birds by Witherby, Jourdain, Ticehurst, and Tucker. Display and posturing. Chief ceremonial behavior is the dance, often seen in captivity and observed in wild birds by J. Woolley, H. Sieber, G. Hoffman, and others. Bird walks with quick steps and wings held out in circle, ellipse, or figure of 8, makes several deep bows, springs high in the air to right and left, picks up small objects from the ground, throws them up, catches them, and stops with a jerk in an erect attitude. Performed by both sexes and by single birds, pairs, or groups, not only in or near pairing season. Occurs also in big gatherings on migration, and under favorable conditions even in winter quarters. Appears to be expression of general liveliness or excitement, and not primarily sexual. Stated to be easily induced in tame birds by dance-like movements of human beings. According to Sieber, adults arrive on breeding ground paired, but young, unpaired birds remain in parties for a time. First, sexual advance seems to take place in the form of incessant following about a female by one or more males in the stiff attitude called by O. Heinroth the parade step, with long strides and thighs showing well beyond the belly feathers. Often several birds walked thus one behind the other at some distance apart, but gradually getting nearer and each carrying head with bill turned back. If one bird stops, all do so and perform false preening, touching back feathers with tip of bill, while wings are held out somewhat and long secondaries ruffled up. Trumpeting has often a ceremonial character, being performed by 2 or more birds with neck stretched up and bill in air, sometimes also with dropped wings. See also account of duet under voice. It is an interesting thought that the dithyrambic choruses, or thigh hymns, sung in honor of Dionysus, and which were the foundation of Greek drama, may derive from an archaic imitation of the beautiful ceremonial dance of the crane or ibis. In Delos, the dance performed in exposition of the mysteries of the Cretan labyrinth was called the crane, being an imitation of the circling passages of the labyrinth. Plutarch, Life of Theseus, 21. There is, moreover, a Romanian folk tale of how a lame stork fetched the water of life from the mountains that knock against one another. He plunged into the depths to fill his vessels, but lost his tail as the mountains closed furiously upon him. Hence, says the story, storks have no tails. The lame stork seems here to take the part of Hermes conducting Persephone from the underworld. See A. B. Cook, Zeus, Appendix P, page 977. I do not, however, discount the possibility that the thigh is a synonym for the generative organs, for Kabbalist teachings held that when Jacob said, "Put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh," he was really bidding his son swear on the sign of the covenant. Zohar, translated by H. Sperling and M. Simon, Volume 11, page 315. But it is difficult to see how the laming of the various demigods, or Jacob's wrestling with an angel, could be explained as circumcision. If I am right, the sacred thigh of Jacob, on which his son took a solemn oath, is rather the thigh of the initiate ibis, Thoth, sacred because it is the emblem of his first steps towards baptism and enlightenment. Our Lord, according to the revelation of St. John, will bear his name upon his thigh at his second coming, thus indicating in symbolic language his office of the great advocate and mediator, the high priest who has entered into the Holy of Holies, to make atonement for our sins. So much I have written to show how unlikely it is that the mystery of the thigh had anything to do with a ritual deformation of the body, and how many other explanations could serve equally well or better. But if we leave all question of the physical, whether it be lamed thigh or pierced heel, and seek the spiritual meaning of an incurable wound to the heart or soul, we shall find that the rich fisher, Thoth, the high priest of the Egyptian mysteries, in due time yields place to Israel, the nation of priests, personified as the lame king Jacob, of whom the Lord spoke by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, Thy bruise is incurable, and thy wound is grievous. There is none to plead thy cause, that thou mayest be bound up. Thou hast no healing medicines. Yet in the day of redemption I will restore health unto thee, and I will heal thy wounds, saith the Lord. Jeremiah 30. Now let us follow the stately halting steps of the ibis-headed Thoth, Cassiel, our recording angel, and all the company of good priests and fishers, from the time of Thoth, Jacob, and Moses, to the day of St. Peter, and let them lead us from this dark hole of Wookiee to the bright sunshine which lies without. Persephone, A Study of Two Worlds, Part 2, Chapter 2, The Problem of Reality. On the 10th November, 1619, René Descartes, being then a young gentleman of 23 soldiering in the Bavarian service, retired to rest in his overheated quarters at Neuburg on the Danube, and was visited by 3 dreams which made a deep impression on him. The expression which he uses is dans un poêle, and this has generally been taken to refer to the physical circumstances. But he also tells us that at the time he was immersed in his thoughts, grappling with freshly emerging ideas, and it is possible that he used the phrase in a figurative sense. The content of the dreams need not concern us. The really important thing about them was evidently their vividness, for, as we shall see, Descartes was certainly left with that impression which everybody must have experienced in similar circumstances at some time or other, that although he had indisputably been dreaming, something had really happened. Ordinarily, on our awaking after a dream, the sense of the reality of the outer life flows back with such overpowering force that we are immediately aware of the less substantial nature of the recent experience. Recognizing at once that it was only a dream, we dismiss its implications as unworthy of further attention. If, for instance, I dream that I have returned to boarding school, my first mental act on awaking is to compare this situation with the picture of my present outer world condition, which is always at the back of my mind, and to realize that the two are incompatible. I have long since achieved adult status and am free of the petty restrictions of school discipline and the subordinate position of the pupil. It is an unheard of and virtually impossible thing for a man of my age to find himself suddenly returned to the situation of boyhood. Furthermore, I realize such a change could not occur without previous preparation, and a hurried examination of my memories of the immediate past discloses, to my relief, that no such preparations have taken place. These processes of thought, of course, occur so rapidly and with so little conscious elaboration that I am hardly aware of them. I am conscious only of the immediate conviction that my recent experience was impossible and absurd, and cannot therefore have been real. What has happened is that I have reorientated myself rapidly in accordance with my picture of the outer world and my situation in it, and before I accept the reality of any experience, I demand that it should be compatible with this picture, and should fit into it without violating any of the rules of logic or any of my convictions regarding what is possible. If it fails to satisfy these requirements, I regard it as a delusion. Since I am familiar with dreams and their disconnected and irrational nature, I can immediately and easily account for my recent experience by classifying it as a dream, and thus as lacking any practical importance or implications. I can in fact discount it as a real experience, from which it would be necessary to draw conclusions regarding my relationship with the outer world, and thus need trouble my head no more with it. This attitude is, of course, necessary in order to enable me to deal with my life in the outer world, for on awaking I have immediately to concern myself with a host of problems connected with the latter. Even if they be no more than those of getting up and dressing, if I were to devote my attention to the dream experiences, regarding them in the same light as those of waking life, I should not only waste a great deal of time, but should also begin to base my behavior on false premises. If I went so far as to abandon all discrimination between these two modes of experience, I should become totally incapable of coming to terms with the outer world, and should have to be certified insane and placed under restraint. When in a later volume we come to consider the case of Nietzsche, we shall see this process exemplified. This brings us to the first important conclusion regarding the two worlds, or two modes of experience, namely that the ability of the individual to lead a rational, independent life in civilized surroundings is dependent on his maintaining a modicum of discrimination between the two. For everybody has dreams, no matter how little importance he attaches to them, or how quickly he succeeds in forgetting them. Dream experience, or an inner life which manifests itself in other forms besides dreams, is universal in humanity, even though in many individuals, in fact in the great majority, it barely reaches consciousness. It is only by segregating it strictly from all those other experiences which conform to his picture of the outer world, which he calls reality, that the individual is able to maintain himself as a responsible, independent person. This is the purpose of the barrier. But there are occasions when the reorientation, in accordance with the outer world picture, does not take place with the usual ease and spontaneity. This occurs when dreams possess such a degree of vividness and intensity, or are accompanied by so powerful an aura of importance, that the dreamer, on awaking, cannot rid himself of the conviction that something has really happened. Alternatively, the memory of the dream situation may recur later in the day, or even after a considerable interval, in the guise of a factual memory, in which capacity the subject for a moment accepts it, only to realize with something of a shock that it was not factual at all, but only a dream. These are what Jung characterizes as great dreams, in contrast to small dreams of every day. He gives examples from the cases of patients in whom the occurrence of such great dreams heralded the attainment of some important stage in mental progress, and states that the distinction is recognized by primitives. See Jung, The Integration of the Personality, and Modern Man in Search of a Soul. Among the latter, the dreaming of great dreams is the province of the chief, or medicine man. The importance attached to the dreams of leaders persisted into early civilization, e.g. Pharaoh's dream in Genesis 41, and Constantine's dream in Hoc Signo Vinces before Pons Mulvius. And when such a dream event occurs, a tribal council is called, and the dream related and discussed as an important happening. The distinction, of course, is mainly a subjective and entirely a relative one, for it is mainly the incommunicable intensity of this experience which enables the dreamer to decide when a dream is great. Yet, in the last resort, it is often the intensity of an experience which serves as our criterion in deciding on the degree of its reality. Objectively speaking, there is no difference of kind between great and small dreams, but only one of degree. There is, however, an objective element which makes comparison possible, and it is to be found in the proportion of universal or archetypal, as against personal and particular elements, by which the content is characterized. Even more convincing, of course, are what are colloquially called visions, which are, in effect, dreams which occur when the body is in a waking condition. Here, the ready explanation, "it was only a dream," is inapplicable, since the subject knows from experience that mental states of the kind in question do not normally occur during waking life. He therefore feels it necessary to fit the content of the vision into his picture of the outer world. In other words, he attributes what he calls reality to it, and seeks to discover causes and antecedents for it in the outer world, which he would feel under no necessity of doing if the same experience had occurred at a time when he knew himself to have been asleep. In consequence, he usually concludes that supernatural forces have been at work. These considerations lead to a second important conclusion regarding the two worlds, that we are in fact so familiar with the duality of experience that we accept it without question, provided only that the two forms occur in situations which we are familiar. This familiarity may be at second hand, for if we are assured that we were under the influence of a drug or of an abnormally high temperature at the time of the vision, or even of acute emotional stress, we are also prepared to accept its incongruity without further question, since the effects of these conditions on consciousness are familiar to us by report. At all events, it is clear that the dreams of Descartes were great dreams in the subjective sense, for the starting point of his whole system was the question of the reality of dream experience. He states that in the period before the dreams, he was filled with enthusiasm and discovered the foundations of a wonderful new science. The dreams are related in a short manuscript entitled Olympica, which starts, Ex Novembris 1619, cum plenus forum enthusiasmo et mirabilis scientia fundamenta reperirum. See Haldane, Descartes. The 10th November was the eve of St. Martin, an occasion when heavy drinking was customary. It has accordingly been suggested that Descartes was probably drunk when he went to bed, but this is entirely beside the point, which is what he made of his experiences afterwards. Exactly what his line of thought previous to the dreams may have been we do not know, but his Principia opens with the following argument. His purpose was to elucidate the nature, limits, and validity of knowledge in general, and his method was to start by questioning the reality of everything which we habitually take for granted. We believe, he says in effect, in the reality of the outer world which, we assume, is revealed by our waking experiences. But this reality is incompatible with the reality of the world which we experience in dreams. If the one is real, then it seems the other cannot be. Yet we do experience a world in our dreams, and sometimes with a vividness no less than that with which we experience things in our waking life. If there is no reality behind the dream experiences, to what can they be attributed? Assuming, for the sake of argument, that there is a demon who produces the dream images and displays them to us, how can we know that it is not this demon or another who similarly creates and displays to us the images of waking experience? The fact that other people confirm the objective validity of the latter is of course no proof, since those others may themselves be a part of the delusion. Dream characters, moreover, behave in exactly the same way. The demons are obviously not intended literally. He admits that he uses the term in order to avoid imputing such trickery to God in the Principia. The point is simply that all we know consists of our individual experiences and what we can deduce from them, and there are no grounds for assuming that there is any greater reality behind the experience of waking life than behind those of dreams. The only thing we know for certain, Descartes continues in effect, is that there is experience, or that experience exists, and that therefore somebody must be experiencing it. That somebody is I, the subject. In it resides the only reality of which we can be certain, cogito ergo sum, which, in modern terminology, might be freely translated, I experience, therefore I am certain that I, at any rate, am real. Descartes was, I believe, the first critical Western philosopher to arrive at this central conclusion of philosophy. I should not, however, be in the least surprised if confrontation with evidence that some other modern European had anticipated him, for the idea is as old as speculative thought. One of its most beautiful and striking statements is to be found in Chuang Tzu's Butterfly Dream, see page 185, which was written nearly 2,000 years before Descartes came into the world. It is also the central theme of Indian thought, but that was not imported into Western philosophy until the days of Schopenhauer, 2 centuries later. We Westerners must not forget that we are barbarian upstarts, and that in many respects we still lag far behind the maturer civilizations of the ancient East. The central point at which Descartes had arrived was the recognition of the fundamental significance of the subject-object relationship. He had reached the conclusion, although he did not succeed in finding a complete formulation of it, that everything we commonly believe was open to question except the one ultimate unquestionable fact, that something was going on in his mind. Whether that something did or did not represent something else, i.e. some reality outside his mind, on which that which was in his mind, i.e. that of which he was aware, depended, was open to question. But the fact that he was aware of something was not so open. He perceived that that awareness demanded a subject, and his conclusion he expressed in the famous cogito ergo sum. It is worth going into this formula a little more closely. In the first place, we may note that cogitare, which nowadays we should render to experience, since it must cover feeling, sensation, and any other form of awareness besides thinking in the narrow sense, is the real nucleus or starting point of the argument. It is that something going on in the mind which we cannot deny. We can therefore start with the statement, there is experience. It is impossible to deny this, but that is all that we have yet established as our starting point. The next point is that we cannot conceive of any happening without a subject. Doing is meaningless without something which does. Being, even, is meaningless without something which is. Experience, being a happening, therefore demands somebody to experience. We may say Descartes experiences, or I experience, but the use of the pronoun I is no more than a grammatical convenience, and if, in the latter case, the speaker is Descartes himself, the statement could equally well be made in the form Descartes experiences, just as a young child says John wants instead of I want. Thus, cogito ergo sum need mean no more than René Descartes thinks, therefore he is. But is that really what Descartes meant? We may doubt it. What he was trying to say was, a subject experiences, or this experience which we have agreed to accept as the central, unquestionable fact, from which to start our enquiry, demands a subject. Since there is experience, there must also be a subject. But who is this subject? As soon as we name René Descartes, we have an object of experience which possesses a number of particular attributes. René Descartes was a certain definite person possessing a body, a past life, a father and mother, and so on, and in naming him we imply the existence of these things. That, however, is by no means justified by our proposition. For the fact that there is experience does not in itself imply that there must be a René Descartes. It merely implies that there must be a subject of experience. This subject, therefore, must be distinguished from the personal René Descartes. We shall discover more about it shortly, and in the meanwhile I shall distinguish it by referring to it as the subject with a capital S. All that we know about it so far is that it is that which experiences. But how does René Descartes, or the subject, whichever of them it may be that is making the statement, know that it experiences? The answer can only be that it experiences something other than itself. By this means it knows that it experiences, and therefore that it is, or exists. An experience of nothing is not conceivable, and the subject cannot experience itself. There must then be an object which the subject experiences. The one demands the other, just as the male demands the female, and the buyer the seller. Neither is possible without the other. We must not jump to the conclusion that this implies that there must be material objects, or objects of any kind outside the mind. That which the subject experiences need be no more than the substantive experience. The essential nature of this we have not yet discovered in the course of our argument, and it was in effect what Descartes proposed to find out. He called it knowledge and embarked on a critical investigation of its possibilities. For the time being I shall call it the object, which may be taken as a generalization, without specific attributes, denoting that which is experienced by the subject. From this point it is possible to proceed in two directions, towards the subject or the object respectively. Oriental thinkers have tended to follow the former line, concentrating on the ultimate reality of the subject and brushing the object aside as a mere delusion. Pursuing the nature of the subject, they have reached Chuang-Tzu's position, namely that we cannot tell who the subject is. Sometimes it appears to be the man Chuang-Tzu, and sometimes the butterfly. The Indians, going farther, perceived that both Chuang-Tzu and the butterfly are in fact objects, which can be known to the subject when it breaks its identification with either of them. Thus, looking through the eyes of Chuang-Tzu, it sees the butterfly as a separate entity, but looking through those of the butterfly, it sees Chuang-Tzu. Normally, these two modes of experience of the one subject are distinct and separate, but we are all capable, on occasion and in varying degrees, of seeing ourselves from outside, or of alternating between the viewpoints of the butterfly and of Chuang-Tzu, as we do between dreaming and waking, and yet we retain the contrasting modes of experience in a single stream of memory. Who is it, then, who can see ourselves? It can only be the ultimate subject, called in the Upanishads Atman, the Self, who is neither you nor I, nor Chuang-Tzu, nor the butterfly, but all of them together, and at the same time none of them. In the formula of the Upanishads, looking through our eyes it sees, listening with our eyes it hears, perceiving our thoughts it knows, but it can in no wise be seen or heard or known. See Paul Deussen, Allgeschichte die Philosophie. The final stage is the recognition of the fact that subject and object are contrasting modes of an ultimate one, the sphere of indeterminacy or totality, concerning which, however, nothing whatever can be predicated, since it is neither knower nor known, but both. It is neither existent nor non-existent. It is at the same time all that is, and nothing. This concept is already inherent in that of Atman, the great self, as opposed to the limited personal self, and Atman is often interpreted in this sense. With the further implications of this matter we shall be concerned in later volumes of this study. For the present we may content ourselves with recognizing it as a possible line of speculation. Descartes, in conformity with the prevailing stream of Western thought, proceeded in the opposite direction. Having intuitively reached, thus early in life, the crucial point of mystical philosophy, namely that all existence exists solely by virtue of the existence of an absolute subject in correlation with an absolute object, which latter was implicit in his assertion that the subject thought, and was later to be identified by Kant as the thing in itself, das Ding an sich, he seems to have overlooked the line of speculation opened by the recognition of the unique position of the subject and his own mysterious identity with it. It does not seem to have occurred to him that the entity in question in any way transcended the phenomenon known as René Descartes, who had been born in Touraine on 31st March 1596, the third son of Joachim Descartes, and who was at the time experiencing the world from the viewpoint of a mercenary in the Bavarian army. Assuming apparently that the identity of this young man with the ultimate subject was self-evident and required no qualification, he turned to the consideration of the object, to which he devoted the remainder of his life. He had tacitly and implicitly presupposed the real existence of an object of some kind as his starting point, and was only concerned to find out what it was really like. In other words, as he put it to himself, he embarked upon a critical investigation of what it was possible to know. His speculations led him to discoveries in the spheres of mathematics and logic, which have served as the foundations of most of modern thought. But with these we are not concerned here. The points which do interest us are the following four. A. Descartes was the first, or among the first, of the representatives of the stream of European thought to formulate an idea long familiar in the Orient, namely that all we can be said to know is what we experience, or, as he put it, what we think, and that there is no justification for assuming the existence of a world or a class of objects concealed behind our direct experience, and possessing a greater degree of reality than those experiences themselves. He did in fact go on to postulate an independent objective reality, not in material objects but in notions, which he maintained presented themselves with an inherent force of conviction. He saw these mainly as logical propositions, but in the last resort they are equivalent to Plato's ideas or to Jung's archetypes. Philosophers, as Jung says, generally end by writing about their own psychology, and Descartes was in fact describing the constellations of his own mind, which was ruled by thinking. To a musician, the qualities of chords present themselves with the same unquestionable certainty as logical propositions did to Descartes. It is a matter of the projection of an archetypal image, which might be described as that of truth, or of the absolute object, into different classes of experience. The pattern of this archetype confers the property of unquestionability on its recipient and hence endows it with the power of conviction. Hence, the world apparently revealed in a dream has no more or no less reality than that apparently revealed by our waking experiences. The latter are found to be more coherent and more rational, but that is all. B. Proceeding from this conclusion, he recognized that the subject exists independently of the nature of its experiences, cogito ergo sum. It may be immersed in the world of a dream or in that of normal waking experience, but it is the same subject even though the implications of these two modes of experience are incompatible. In other words, two separate and irreconcilable worlds of experience do not demand two separate subjects. C. The Orientals proceeded from this point to the logical conclusion that there can be only one absolute and ultimate subject, which transcends the individual personal subject. Individual subjects are merely separate modes of experience of the one subject. These individual modes are normally segregated from one another by the fact that none of them has direct knowledge of the experience of the others. Chuang-Tzu's statement of this fact is translated by Wilhelm as follows. Now I do not know whether Chuang-Tzu dreamed that he was a butterfly, or whether the butterfly dreamed that it was Chuang-Tzu, although there is certainly a difference between Chuang-Tzu and a butterfly. Thus it is with the transformation of things. Das war Buch vom Südlichen Blütenland, translated by Richard Wilhelm. Introduction dated 1912. My translation from the German. Giles, however, translates, Now I do not know whether I was then a man dreaming I was a butterfly, or whether I am now a butterfly dreaming I am a man. Between a man and a butterfly there is necessarily a barrier. The transition is called metempsychosis. Chuang-Tzu, translated by Herbert A. Giles, 1886. Both translations are now unobtainable, and it is high time that one or other was republished. The German version appeared in 1940, and at least 9,000 copies were sold. In view of the nature of ancient Chinese, which lacks tense forms, personal pronouns, etc., there is no reason to regard either of these translations as more accurate than the other. Wilhelm, while implicitly accepting Giles' qualifications as a translator, criticizes his version on the grounds that it is strongly subjectively colored, and that in various difficult passages he offers conjecture rather than translation. The translation of ideograms, which are neither concrete nor abstract but serve for both, into a modern European language, however, evidently cannot be done without a good deal of conjecture, and in my view, where the two translations differ materially, Wilhelm's tends to be obscure and meaningless. Giles' version, on the other hand, brings out a perfectly definite system of thought, which is coherent throughout and not inconsistent with that revealed by Wilhelm's. The version which offers the lay reader some intelligible interpretation of the difficult passages therefore seems to me preferable. The barrier mentioned by Giles we already know, and have defined it as that which separates the two worlds. We may now give the definition in a more philosophical form, saying that it is that which segregates the various individual modes of experience of the universal subject from one another. We know that there is always a door through the barrier, enabling the individual subject to pass in full consciousness from his normal waking mode of experience into another, which we have designated the other side. This duality of experience in the mind of the single individual, the commonest form of which is the alternation between dreaming and waking, is the exception to the law of the total segregation of different individual modes of experience by the barrier. The essential point about this duality is that the two modes are united in a single stream of memory, for the waking man remembers his dream, and the dreamer commonly has some knowledge, albeit confused, of his waking life. It is not, therefore, excessively difficult to accept the identity of the subject in this particular dichotomy of experience. To accept its identity in two entirely distinct individuals, however, requires a considerable effort of the imagination. In his parable, Chuang-Tzu leads us gently from the one to the other. It is a parable because he could not, of course, really have dreamt that he was a butterfly in the sense suggested, since a butterfly's outlook and mental processes could not be embodied in a human memory. What he is really saying is, Chuang-Tzu and the butterfly are in one sense one, and in another they are two. I am both and neither. This fact is demonstrated in the phenomenon of dreaming. It is worth noting that at about the same time the Greeks were adopting the butterfly as the symbol of what we now call the soul or psyche. Descartes, however, failed to reach this stage of understanding because, like most of us, he was too closely identified with his memories. He was prepared to admit that the personal subject embodied in René Descartes could live in two entirely separate and incongruous worlds without forfeiting its underlying identity, but he failed to take the further step of visualizing an impersonal and absolute subject, lying behind the personal René Descartes, and experiencing in every mind according to its degree, without forfeiting its supreme unity and identity. It was left for Schopenhauer, basing himself on the Upanishads, translations of which had in the meanwhile become available, to take this final step 2 centuries later. Nevertheless, Descartes' idea represented a great advance from the confused thought of the Middle Ages. It disclosed the first stirring of the perception of the duality of experience, of the existence of two worlds, in the modern European mind. After reaching this crucial perception as a result of a violent upsurging, in the form of his great dreams, of contents from the collective archetypal layer of the unconscious mind. The contents of the dreams may be summarized as follows. 1. He is fleeing from certain ghosts. A great wind forces him to bow to the ground as he goes. He decides to enter a church situated in his path to pray, but as he passes through the courtyard, somebody calls him. Desiring to turn back, he is seized by the force of the wind and turned about again, awakes in fear. 2. On falling asleep again, is awakened by a terrifying clap of thunder, the sparks of which he still sees in the room on opening his eyes. 3. Concerned with a Latin text he is studying, he comes to the question, Quod vitae sectibor iter? What course shall I follow in life? Whereupon somebody presents him with a paper on which is written, Est et non, yes and no. A faint suggestion of it is and it is not. See Louis Dimier, La vie raisonnable des Ardis. Reference has already been made to the symbolism of the wind as the power of the spirit, and the thunderclap has the same significance. In the I Ching it is said of the trigram Chen, thunder or the arousing, God comes forth in the sign of the arousing. The image is used in a very similar sense by Giordano Bruno, 1548 to 1600, a similarity between whose system and that of Descartes has been discerned, although the probability of the latter's having read his works is slight. These are therefore pure archetypal symbols of the power emanating from the self, and Descartes experienced them in a manner which induced powerful feelings of awe, fear, and helplessness in face of a superior power, the force of the wind, which turned him round against his will. These manifestations can be very shaking. He therefore showed perfect insight in interpreting the dreams as manifestations of God. The paradox est et non, yes and no, is a further allusion to the mysterious and unfathomable nature of the self. Descartes virtually abandoned it by ignoring its implications regarding the nature of the subject-object relationship and of the subject itself, embarking instead on an intensive study of the nature of the object. In so doing, he virtually set the course followed by European thought up to the present day, which will no doubt be followed for some centuries to come. This must not, of course, be regarded as his own unaided performance. Others were already working in the same direction, and if there had been no Descartes, his discoveries would, sooner or later, have been made by somebody else. Nevertheless, he is typical and representative of modern Western thought. We are the heirs of Descartes. His conception of the object was an advanced one, and superior to anything which had gone before. He saw it as a coherent and logical system, all tending towards and deriving from an ultimate perfection, which of course he called God. This is characteristic of our Western outlook, which seats the absolute, whether we call it God or not, in the object and not, like the Orientals, in the subject. It insists, moreover, that the absolute must be of a rational and coherent nature. the absolute, the prime cause, the eternal, or whatever we choose to call it, is an archetypal image which the human mind is compelled to project into some form or other. The Westerner seats it in an absolute object, that is to say, a system of thought of such complete objectivity that it remains the same from every conceivable viewpoint, or in other words, is independent of every possible individual subject. He visualizes the subject as an infinity of separate, distinct, and virtually worthless particular entities, in fact as unreal. The Oriental, on the other hand, or at any rate the Oriental civilizations of the past, seats it in an absolute subject which shall be free of all dependence on any object. The object is seen as a heterogeneous collection of accidentals, the 10,000 things of the Chinese, which are no more than an illusion, hence worthless and unreal, in very much the same light, in fact, as the Westerner regards the subject. Reality is a purely relative term. Both outlooks are, of course, fundamentally incomplete, and the most profound minds, not necessarily the formal philosophers, of both East and West have transcended both in the form of intimations of an ultimate one, which at the same time is and is not, is possible and impossible, is all things and nothing, is, in short, unknowable. On this basis, of course, no formal, consistent system can be constructed, since everything is seen to be self-contradictory and all truths are paradoxes. This is not the place to go further into this matter, which leads directly to mystical speculation. We shall be concerned with some of its implications later in the course of this study, and I mention it here solely to indicate that there is some kind of middle way, as the Taoists call it, in which the polarity of subject and object is transcended. Thus, we see that in the phenomenon of dreaming, man has always recognized the existence of an alternative form of experience, enjoyed by that same subject which apprehends the more coherent and familiar experiences of waking life. This profound and vital understanding has, unfortunately, become largely lost to the contemporary mind, as a result of the thinking derived from those current psychological systems which seek to explain away dreams as mere distorted interpretations of the sole truth of waking life. This development, I believe, made it clear once and for all that the modern Western trend of rationalization and objectivization had reached the point of no return. No further progress is possible in that direction. We can advance only if we reverse it. The more penetrating and intuitively gifted minds of both past and present have further perceived that there are no grounds for attributing any greater theoretical reality to the one mode of experience than to the other. Either both are real or neither is. Since the two are in many respects incompatible, if we are to accord any reality to experience at all, we must recognize that there are at least two, if not more, distinct and separate modes of reality. Two, at least, are universally experienced by every individual. This pattern, being universal in the human mind, is archetypal, and its archetypal symbol is the image of the two worlds. Everything is thus seen to hinge on what we regard as real. There are two ways of approaching this question. We may either proceed theoretically, attempting to equate the concept of reality with others, such as those of invariability, universality, absoluteness, or whatnot, and then denying the attribute of reality to any entity or phenomenon which lacks these properties. Or, alternatively, we may adopt the empirical standpoint, maintaining that real is merely an epithet describing a certain manner of experiencing phenomena, which we apply by extension to the phenomena themselves. Thus do I refute Bishop Berkeley, cried Dr. Johnson, giving the curbstone a violent kick. This characteristic outburst illustrates the conflict between the two opposing viewpoints described above. Berkeley had maintained that the objects of experience existed only as images in the mind, and therefore, at least by inference, that they were not real. I have not scoured the texts in order to ascertain whether the bishop actually makes use of the word real in this connection. The formulation given above represents the purport of his theory, and it was that which incensed Dr. Johnson. Johnson, who lacked philosophical perception, insisted on the common sense viewpoint that anything which produced an intense sensation in his toe, accompanied by a sound audible to others as well as himself, could not be denied the property of reality. What he overlooked was that his toe and his ears were as much a part of the unknown outer world as the stone. All that his consciousness experienced on this occasion was something mental, compounded of what it interpreted as the product of sensations of impact in his toe and of sound in his ears, and it was from these that it constructed the image of the solid curbstone. But that image existed in his mind, and whether it corresponded to anything outside his mind, i.e. unknown to him, cannot be ascertained. It certainly did correspond both to the sense impressions and to the vast complex pattern made up of his previous sensory experiences of a like nature, and classified by him as solid objects, but all these things were in his mind, so that all that could be said was that he had recognized an experience as corresponding to others which he had made previously, and in which he had discerned a certain pattern. Others, it is true, presumably heard the sound produced by the kick, and if they followed the doctor's example, could be relied on to conform that they also experienced a sensation which they recognized as that of the impact in the toe. But as we have already noted, the same thing occurs in dreams, in which other persons appearing in the dream confirm that they share the experiences of the dreamer. Berkeley, on the other hand, seemed to the doctor to be denying reality to the curbstone. What he actually said was that he had no direct means of ascertaining its existence other than by sensory experience, and that, for all he knew, when he could neither see, feel, nor hear it, it might have ceased to exist. We shall go into this matter in greater detail later. For the present, it is sufficient to point out that Berkeley, whatever his theories on the subject, must certainly have conducted his life on the assumption that such things as curbstones were real, since otherwise he would frequently have found himself prostrate on the pavement. What it comes down to is simply that the two men were using the word real, or its equivalent, if they chose another terminology, in completely different senses. Berkeley was insisting that reality implied certain properties of universality, etc., which were lacking in the image of a curbstone constructed in the mind on the basis of sensory impressions, while Johnson was retorting that the experiences connected with curbstones, whatever the ultimate nature of the latter may be, were so intense and of such immediate importance in the practical conduct of life that they could not be ignored. That was what he meant, and what most people mean by reality. Summary. The conclusions which we have reached so far may be summarized as follows. 1. All that we know is what we consciously experience, which is what may be described as in our minds. Experience may take various forms, e.g. sensory impressions, such as that which Dr. Johnson recognized as impact in his toe, logical propositions, such as that twice 2 makes 4, feelings such as anger, shame, etc., and possibly others as well. 2. By classifying various items of experience according to properties which we perceive that they possess in common, and by bringing them into association with one another, we form coherent patterns, to which we find that they invariably conform, e.g. visual experiences which we classify as images of the type of that which Dr. Johnson recognized as a curbstone, are associated with tactile sensations. Virtually all the experiences of waking life can be fitted together into an immensely complex but coherent and intelligible system centered around the individual's awareness of his own particular identity. This pattern is not subject to his volition, i.e., it remains the same whether he wishes it to or not, and if he forgets about it, it will assert itself unexpectedly in a manner which, he realizes on reflection, he might have foreseen if he had devoted due attention to it. He therefore regards it as an outer world, existing in its own right outside his mind and independently of him. If he is of average intelligence and leads an average life, he finds that concentration on this pattern enables him to maintain a satisfactory existence, whereas neglect of it is followed by unpleasant consequences. Therefore, he attributes paramount importance to it. 3. When he is asleep, and sometimes on occasions when he is awake, however, he has experiences of a nature which does not fit into the pattern. He soon learns to identify these as anomalous and finds that neglect of them is apparently, I say apparently advisedly, not followed by any recognizable consequences, unpleasant or pleasant. He therefore concludes that these experiences do not represent any outside world, existing independently of him. Since they do not appear to have any further significance, he discards them as unsubstantial rubbish, as unreal in contrast to the reality represented by normal waking experience. 4. Descartes and the Oriental thinkers, however, discerned that there are no adequate grounds for making this differentiation. The fact that we see no significance in dream experience does not mean that it could not have significance for us if we understood it. They thought indeed that they could discern considerable significance in it. Similarly, the fact that we think we understand waking experience does not necessarily mean that it represents any independent reality in a manner which the dream experience does not. They accounted for it the incompatibility of the two modes of experience by the theory of the universal subject, which is capable of experiencing in more than one world, i.e., according to more than one of the systems or patterns which are characteristic of each individual world or stream of experience. 5. Thus, when we say that anything is real in the ordinary sense, as distinct from any special sense demanded by a particular philosophical theory, we are referring to the nature of an experience, concerning which we believe that it has, or potentially could have, importance for us, and of which we must therefore take account. We reach this judgment either on the basis of the intensity of the direct experience, or in the case of Descartes' dream, or, more frequently, on that of the compatibility of the particular experience with a system or pattern existing in our minds, but which we believe represents an independent outer world, which is the same for all possible subjects. This is the basis of what Kant called synthetic judgments, in which something is added to the evidence of the senses on the basis of a logical deduction. What he overlooked was that the evidence of the senses is itself in the first place interpreted and judged in accordance with that same system, based largely on the laws of logic, which provides the additional element. The general picture which thus emerges has already been adumbrated in connection with the mind and the brain. It is that of the mind as a mere emptiness contained within a substantial outer world, something like a bubble in a liquid, its exclusive function being to recognize or know that outer world, which is revealed to it by means of the senses. It is in fact nothing but the picture of an animate body seen from outside. We see how the animate body adjusts itself to its environment, and how it is separated from it by the principle of identity or individual life, which permeates it but does not extend to the environment. The skin, the envelope of the body, seems to be a barrier separating two absolutely distinct entities. Inside it, all is sentient life, unified and coordinated by the purposeful identity which permeates it, while outside, completely cut off from it and apparently of an entirely different nature, is the non-sentient outer world which goes its own way, and is not subject to the life force within. This picture we transpose quite without justification to the mind, confusing it with the brain, and imagining it as a kind of localized space, outside which is the material world, as we imagine it would be seen by a hypothetical absolutely objective external observer, while inside it is an insubstantial picture, more or less correct according to the capacity of the particular brain of that independent outer world. The picture inside the mind is seen as unreliable and unreal. The best we can do is to check it at every possible opportunity against the external reality. But how are we to discover what that reality is? From the foregoing, it has already become evident that the task is not so simple as it might at first sight appear. The evidence of the senses is our usual standby, but it is not considered completely reliable, since in various abnormal conditions, and above all in dreams, we experience sensory images which we subsequently reject as incompatible with reality, and therefore as erroneous and misleading. Hence, we must admit that we have a second criterion of reality which is to be found inside our minds, as has already been indicated. Moreover, the raw material of the sense impressions has no meaning for us until it has been interpreted by comparison with images in the mind. Our judgment of reality therefore essentially consists in comparing items of experience with a criterion or complex image in the mind. If the experience corresponds to it, we accept it as real. If it is incompatible, as in the case of most dream experience, we reject it out of hand. It is, therefore, of the utmost importance for our enquiry to ascertain how this criterion or image of reality is built up, and of what elements it consists.